Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Douglas, and I am going to talk about my proposal PowerPoint, drug effects on the brain. So my introduction, all drugs affect the brain, both long and short term. It's dependent of our overall health, body type, size, and the amount and how strong the drug is. It also depends if we're taking the drug alone, with another substance, or have a mental illness. Drugs alter the brain and our basic cognitive function related to impulse control, memory, learning, and attention. Cognitive shifts in the brain can keep the drug use ongoing with maladaptive learning and cravings, making it hard to control thoughts and actions, which can equal to dependency. This becomes enhanced by genetic development and psychosocial influences that mediate across or lack of drugs and social supports. Neurons are activated from certain drugs, such as opioids, because the natural transmitter becomes mimicked by chemical structures of the drug, allowing the drug to attach itself while activating the neurons. The opioid system synchronizes the regions of the brain that influence the pleasure, reward, pain, and affective processes. The regions of the brain responsible for cognitive functioning, such as the peritial, I think that's how you say that, sorry, and the frontal lobes have a large distribution of the opioid receptors, affecting the mu-opioid system and influencing the modulation of motivation validation. Going through the differences between normal rewards and drug rewards and how people misuse the latter due to transmitter reduction and reward circuit. Hypothesis. Hypothesis is opioids can change the brain structure with neurons with how they send, receive, and process signals that travel through transmitters permanently. The alternative hypothesis is opioids do not change the brain structure with neurons with how they send, receive, and process signals that travel through neurotransmitters permanently. Drugs and addiction and mental health are things that affect millions of people, and we must be more understanding with recent information of how the brain works and the factors that affect it. Consider internal and external sources. Literature review. The literature review. With the brain, drugs get in the way of neurons and how information is sent, received, processed through signals that travel through transmitters. Some drugs mimic natural transmitters and attach themselves while activating to the neuron. When people have substance abuse disorders, they develop attachments or they self-medicate, which equals a developmental pathway from insecure to substance abuse. It can have a negative impact on substances, and researching various patterns of attachment, comorbid psychiatric disorders, and severities of substances are important in understanding why and how people become addicted. Psychostimulants alterate the blood-brain barrier, an important boundary to the central nervous system, which causes changes on cell function and causes neurotoxicity. Changes within the blood-brain barrier happen when drugs such as nicotine, alcohol, and heroin are used as learning rewards and struggle of the addict when these drugs are used and how to help them overcome the changes that they may face. These rewards that drugs give a person can be influenced by genetic, psychosocial, or developmental factors that give the user reinforcement of the effects of the drug. The limbic pathways and prefrontal cortex regions cause addictions in people and put them in negative emotional states that tell us that when they take drugs, it temporarily relieves these emotions. With dependence of the drugs on the rise, there is long-term consequences to the brain very much unknown. An increased risk is when adolescents are in a period when they show enhanced behaviors such as impulsivity, novelty seeking, and reward wanting. There is an effective process regulation of pain, reward, and pleasure, and how if we restrict the role, it can influence cognitive functioning and how one controls their behaviors when they are addicted. Looking at how the systems work to control impulse, executive functioning, and reward-based systems. Normal and drug rewards are different as people misuse drugs. The brain adjusts by making less neurotransmitters, and the naturally rewards from the person's brain also decreases. The person then builds a tolerance to the drug and gets themselves into a vicious cycle. When doing research, it's important to take ethical considerations into effect and be familiar with issues as they are designed, reviewed, and conducted per populations. These can include informed consent and participation and participants' decision-making and any risk associated with the research. Methods and data collection. The drug used in the study were 2 opioids, hydrocodone and morphine. The progress was measured with a blood imaging machine to give the participants an EEG weekly to see how the participants' brains would react to the drug, as well as random drug tests to look for any substances and weekly blood tests to rule out any other diagnosis. They had a phone app with a tracker. There was a Likert scale to rate symptoms ranging from 1, which was strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. It was used to record different symptoms participants are experiencing throughout the day. Reminders for taking the drug, checking in for the day or the week, recording symptoms, and coming in for their weekly check-ins and brain scannings. Computer logs were accessible throughout to keep a record of participant symptoms. Food and shelter was provided. Participants are required to stay nightly at the facility to keep additional monitoring over the next 3 years. Payment of $1,500 was given to participants for living expenses, and methadone, or I'm going to botch this, buprenorphine, which focuses on the opioid receptors in the brain, was used in small amounts to get the participants to get off of the opioids after the study was concluded. Therapists, sponsors, and physicians were also used throughout of the time of the study if the participants needed somebody to talk to, as well as getting a checking in once a week from them. Hypothetical data presentation findings. The procedure. Advertisements will be posted online with a voluntary sign-up sheet. They will fill it out, the informed consent and debriefing, and undergo an initial EEG to make sure that the brain is healthy. All participants will be split into 2 even groups, one taking hydrocodone and one taking morphine. 1 pill of 25 milligrams will be given twice a day. Participants are allowed to go home, to work, or school during the day as normal. They have access to a phone app to track the symptoms, and an app for all reminders to check in and out of the facility, and a tracker on their device. For 3 years, they will stay nightly at the facility from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. for close monitoring and weekly check-ins. Weekly check-ins will consist of brain scanning, talking to their doctor and therapist, and blood tests along with the random drug testing. After 3 years, they will spend another 3 years getting clean, seeing a therapist, physician, sponsors, or any other resources needed to live a sober and healthy life, and taking medicines to help them get off of the opioid, as well as close monitoring during the withdrawal stage. Design. This is an in-between subject design and a longitude study for a total of 6 years. Each participant will test the opioid in their random assigned group. 3 years for the experiment and another 3 years for follow-up. There are weekly check-ins with participants staying every night at the facility for additional treatment, as well as the brain scans weekly to monitor brain functions and how they change with the use of opioids. This section right here is my graph that I did for the findings. The test used was a critical value t-test. The most used significant levels in the statistics was a 0.05 or the negative 0.5 when you have a two-sided test, and the formula is as follows. It gives the formula, my critical value, and then interpreting the results. The results show that the hypothesis show that opioids can change the brain with neurons and how they send, receive, and process signals and travel throughout transmitters permanently. The opioid user has consequences that revolve around the brain change and the struggle to recover. Medicines such as methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone all go to the brain structures and processes to normalize the damage as much as they can. Even with medicines, appropriate psychosocial treatments and other resources must be put into place to help somebody with opioid recovery and attempt to get the brain back to a more normal state. Opioid addiction is more like a chronic medical disorder such as schizophrenia, and with long-term care, the disease adverse effects can limit a person's functioning day to day. Suggestions for research, for future research. Suggestions for improving research in the future can be improved access to treatment and recovery services that encourage drugs that reverse overdoses, addiction, and our brain. Going through and seeing how our resources for addiction can be improved to help people or decrease opportunity to take drugs to form a dependence on them, causing addiction and brain damage. Conclusion. Opioids affect our brains and change the neurotransmitters in how we send and receive and process signals. When it comes to the brain, positive rewards and drug rewards can look the same, and misusing drugs tell the brain to stop producing the natural hormones. Longer research times are needed to know if if the brain can go back to normal after an addiction and what that recovery and treatment process would look like. From what research has told us up to this point, there is no permanent cure for the brain after opioid usage and addiction, but hopefully in the future there will be more assured ways to deal with addiction. And then these are my references. Okay,